Hi guys, welcome to the Classes Corner. I'm Kat and we are halfway through Troy Fall of a City. This is episode 4, Spoils of War. And now, again, like I said, halfway through, and the Greek camp are firmly in the Iliad territory now. We've hit the actual Troy text, at least with the Greeks. The Trojans are somewhere else, less to do with actual ancient text, so I'll probably be talking about them less in this episode. So what's happening with the Greeks? Like I said, Iliad book 1. The Myrmidons, Achilles' faction, have sacked Andromache father's Eetion's city. They have combined a few different communities in the Iliad into Eetion's camp because after the sack of the city they capture Briseis, Chryseis and a few others, and Achilles kills Andromache's father. Now Briseis is a young woman. She is taken as Achilles' prize, and then the daughter of the priest of Apollo, Chryseis, is taken by Agamemnon as his. Now I do have to talk about the roles of these two women in particular in the Iliad before I get into the episode as a whole, because the attitude towards women in the Iliad is so fundamentally different, or at least it should be so fundamentally different, that the creators had to change some things when it comes to their interpretation in the show. Because in the Iliad, women, or at least those two women, are objects. They are not characters. They don't have particularly emotive stances, they don't have voices, they don't have lines, they don't have spoken words. They exist to be moved from one part of the story to another part of the story to create conflict as objects. They might as well be a golden tripod that the Greeks keep on giving to each other as prizes. They have no personal attributes as humans. They are objects and they are prizes. So they are slaves. They might as well not be human. So the ancient Greek world had such an objectifying attitude towards certain women, not all the time, because again, lots of tragedies, women do get voices, but they're still written by men, and it's complicated, and it comes in the discussion of them as objects in both the Iliad and the series does create issues of consent, and leads into the topic of sexual assault, which I will be talking about in this episode, and I will be talking about it respectfully and sensitively, and hopefully the comments will follow suit. So basically, when Agamemnon takes Chryseis, like I said, the daughter of the priest of Apollo, he initially seems to take her because she reminds him of Iphigenia, which is not like the text. He just takes her as a prize in the Iliad, and he, after trying to sort of connect with her like a daughter, which is a bit weird, she rebuffs him and he gets angry and he rapes her, and it is horrifying to see. It's just terrible because she's screaming and the Greek camp are doing nothing, because as far as they're concerned, that's Agamemnon's right. She is referred multiple times in the episode as a toy, as a plaything. She is not human to the Greek camp, other than just as a way to gain for Agamemnon to have a prize and to sort of trade back and forth. And again, this is very much like the Iliad. So there is a lot of objectification from her. I think the creators of the show were trying to get across at how horrifying this attitude was and how despicable it is through one particular way, but whether or not they succeeded is sort of a different topic, and I'm not sure how well they did, to be honest. Because they actually changed, because in book 1 of the Iliad, Chryseis is taken. Her father tries to get her back, and then when Agamemnon refuses, her father calls down a curse on the Greeks to give them a plague by Apollo. Now in the show they didn't really do this. Chryseis wants the daughter back and he's sort of standing there and he's waiting, but he doesn't supplicate Agamemnon to do this and he doesn't call down Apollo. What happens is, because Agamemnon rapes Chryseis, Apollo is offended that he committed this awful act, and that is why the plague goes down. Sorry, voice. So there is a thing there where it is much more explicitly the rape that causes the plague, because that's such an awful thing to have done. So there's that. And again, whether or not you think the creators actually got across sort of a more modern view when it comes to the objectification of women, yeah, there's a thing. I mean, Chryseis actually has lines, she has expressions, but it's always uncomfortable, and always sort of whether or not depicting rape is necessary in a series. It's a very, very complicated issue, and I think a lot of people are affected by it in so many different ways. So there's just an issue there. But then you get to the issue of Briseis, who is Achilles' captive, who is Achilles' prize. Now, in the show, he is shown to be quite kind to her. You know, he says, "I don't want you as a slave. I thought you just deserved to live," and he unties her, and she seemingly stays there because she is willingly staying there. There's an issue with that. And then when Agamemnon, after being offended that he had to give up his prize with Chryseis, takes Briseis, it seems that Achilles refuses to fight then after that happens, because he is upset that a person that he likes is being taken away against her will. But in the Iliad, that's not so much the case. Like I said, in the Iliad, these women are basically objects. Achilles doesn't fight not because of Briseis' sake, but because he is offended that a prize has been taken away from him. His honour has been besmirched. So there's a different thing there. Also, Briseis seems to be in a romantic relationship with Achilles in this, and with Patroclus, and I'll get more into that in a minute. And again, I find that quite uncomfortable, because even though Achilles says, "Oh, I didn't want a slave," fundamentally she is still a slave, she is still a captive. Whether or not that can be a consensual situation with, you know, a woman with her captor, I can understand why they wanted to maybe show her having a bit more agency and show Briseis as more of a person, but honestly that makes me quite uncomfortable, that situation. So, give and take on that one. Honestly, I'm not so fond, but we'll see how it works out with her, how she is portrayed in the rest of the series. Whether she has a character or whether or not she might, you know, there is still that level of objectification there. Going on with Achilles and Patroclus, they are in a romantic relationship. The BBC have made that choice to show them together explicitly romantically. I feel like some people might call that the BBC out on trying to maybe pander to modern sensibilities with making them together, but honestly that's not the case. Whether or not Achilles and Patroclus were lovers is a discussion as old as the Trojan myth itself. It's probably before the Iliad was even written as a text. Whether or not Achilles and Patroclus were lovers has been a thing. There's 3 texts specifically that jump out at me that really discuss it. For example, in the Myrmidons, which is a text it's a play, a tragedy that we only have in fragments from Aeschylus, Achilles and Patroclus are explicitly lovers. In Phaedrus' speech in the Symposium of Plato, Achilles and Patroclus are discussed as lovers, and in Aeschines' law text against Timarchus, I think, they are also displayed as virtuous lovers. So there was an ancient Greek perspective that had them as lovers. It's not really a modern thing. Again, the BBC, just as often they are portrayed as not lovers, or just really, really close people. So there's a lot of discussion there. The BBC went one way over another, and that's completely fine. That's I quite like that. I think I'll see how that goes with how they portray their deaths in reference to their relationship, because I feel like there could be something there. But you know, there is a thing. In the Iliad itself, there are definitely some parts which could be interpreted as a romantic relationship between the two. It's not quite as directly explicit. Again, it can be interpreted as either romantic or not. But in the Embassy to Achilles, Achilles is compared to a hero Meleager, who loses his wife Cleopatra when he doesn't fight in a conflict. So Patroclus is therefore put in as the wife figure in Achilles' life, also, I mean, because he eventually is lost because Achilles doesn't fight, but also because their names are very similar. Kleos is the Greek word for glory, Patros is the Greek word for father, so Cleopatra means glory of the father, and Patroclus means glory of the father. It's just the female version of the name and the male version of the name. So there's that. So, and the way Achilles reacts to Patroclus's body is also somewhat indicative of a romantic relationship. Potentially, again, there's up to interpretation, and the BBC have gone with the more Plato, Aeschylus, Ascanius, Cleopatra version. And again, that's completely fine. There's also been some changes in the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon and Patroclus. Why Achilles gets involved in the issue with the plague in the Iliad is because the Greek forces go to him and know that because he is powerful enough to stand up to Agamemnon, he can persuade him, and he can protect the people who want to go against Agamemnon's will. And that's why the quarrel comes about. But in this case, in the show, Achilles gets involved, gets involved in sending Chryseis back because Patroclus specifically comes down with the plague, which isn't really a thing in the text. Patroclus, I think, is unaffected as far as I'm concerned. He's sort of at the meeting where they discuss this, but he's not affected. Achilles doesn't have this sort of person. So they've made Achilles' motivation from a sort of cultural, societal. He's sort of standing up for the whole Greek army and then rebuffs them when he refuses to fight because his honour's been damaged. To Achilles has a personal stake in the cause of the plague, with his lover being affected. His man, as he calls him. So there is that. They changed that. Also, they've changed a bit in the Iliad when they've sort of changed the level where the gods are involved. You don't really see Apollo sending down the plague. In the Iliad, there's sort of a shower of arrows, which I thought would make quite a good visual, but they didn't really do that. Maybe it's a cost thing. But also in the initial quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles, Achilles is pretty much about to stab Agamemnon. He's reaching for his sword, he's insulting him, he's going really vicious with it, and Athena has to pop down, shielded in mist, to basically pull Achilles back and be like, no, you can't kill him, don't do that. You will get your honour and glory eventually, but just don't kill Agamemnon. So she gets directly involved. So the gods are a little bit more involved in the text, but I can understand maybe why they haven't put that in the show. There's also another incident later with the Trojans that the gods don't get involved quite so much, and I will talk about that now. But yeah, when it comes to the depiction of the Trojans, they haven't really had much to do in terms of classical stuff. Most of their stuff in this episode was more modern drama invention, which again is fine because it's a modern show. You do have to, you can't just base everything on the texts. You have to have something there. So they're looking for a traitor in the walls of Troy because they think someone ratted them out, which caused the death of Andromache's father. Andromache has discovered that she's pregnant, that is baby Astyanax, and oh, it's sad. So yeah, I've talked about that a bit before. But Andromache, her main storyline is that she wants to go bury her father. Burial is incredibly important to ancient Greek society because if you don't bury someone, they can't pass on to the underworld, and that's actually an issue in the Iliad quite a lot in the later books. Bodies not being given proper rights, that's a big thing. So Andromache wants to go get her father. Hector won't allow her because she's pregnant now and it's too dangerous. And what they decide to do, they decide to sort of sacrifice a horse instead, which I tried to look into that as much as I could, and I don't think that's a thing. That was an actual ancient Greek practice. Again, if I'm wrong, pop it down below, but I don't think so. I think this show just sort of made that up to give Paris some pathos, because he allows his own horse to be sacrificed because he feels guilty, because he feels, he helped build tunnels and he went on this thing. He feels like it's his fault that city, that Troy's ally is sacked and Andromache's father is dead. So he got a little bit of it on there. Helen's doing, which is sort of Helen sort of let it slip to Achilles, so that's why that happened. So Helen's sort of floating around trying to keep it secret, and that's going on. But yeah, after the real crux, I feel, classically when it comes to the Trojans, is because after Achilles decides to leave the fight, basically, Menelaus and Odysseus decide to broker an agreement with Troy to try and end the war as quickly as possible by having a duel between Menelaus and Paris, which is depicted in book 3 and 4 of the Odyssey. Obviously the show have changed it quite a bit, but this is a thing that happens. Menelaus, you know, in the Iliad, Menelaus, it's sort of an even fight, which the show sort of portrayed, at least at first. They really went in for that, but Menelaus would have gotten the upper hand, and then, you know, it would be a fight to the death, basically. Obviously, the show changed it in one major way, in the fact that they got the priest, who foretold Paris's sort of just leading to the destruction of Troy at his birth, who is not Chryseis. I got that wrong in the last episode, sorry. So he's sort of there, and he sort of tells everyone that Paris is basically cursed, the gods have cursed him, he will lead to Troy's demise. And then what happens is, you know, that sort of shakes Paris, and he starts to lose, and Menelaus is about to kill him, and then Aphrodite sort of pops up, gives Paris a moment, and then Paris basically runs from the fight, and he survives that way. Well, in the Iliad, obviously the priest isn't there, it's just the fight between the two of them. Paris is up for it, he's up for, you know, fighting Menelaus. Menelaus does get the upper hand, but what happens is that Aphrodite explicitly gets involved. She literally lifts Paris out of the fight in a cloud, and then drops him back in his bedroom all clean and perfumed and shiny. He's like, oh well, you know, it did say the fight to the death, but the god just intervened, so nothing I can do on that one. But in this case, Paris runs from the fight. So, I mean, obviously he was prompted to do by Aphrodite, but explicit divine intervention is a different thing. So there is a question of where Paris is running to, and how the Trojan-Greek conflict will reflect that sort of change. Because rather than Paris being taken away from the fight sort of unwillingly and sort of without, you know, he just sort of magicked out of there, he explicitly leaves, so he explicitly breaks the contract himself. So there is a question of how that's going to go down, basically. Yeah, that's basically it for the classics. I think, like I said, that's book 3 and 4 of the Iliad is the duel. Unlike in the Iliad, I mean, I think, you know, most of the Trojans are also there on the plain as opposed to behind the walls. Helen's there, which in the Iliad, she's sort of floating around her bedrooms, and when Paris is magicked in, she's like, oh, well, my ex-husband should have killed you. You're kind in this situation unwillingly now because the goddess got me involved. But here she's she's still in love with Paris. She's very much, you know, they've changed that a little bit, mainly because it's not year 9 of the war. They've moved the events of the Iliad much closer to, you know, so year 2 or something. So yeah, that's how it's gone on. If you think I've missed anything when it comes to the interpretation of the Iliad in this episode or any other text, please pop it down below. I have 2 major nitpicks, neither of which people should care about. It literally just nitpicks for me, which is 1, Nestor didn't intervene between the quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles, and he didn't go, well, in my day there were heroes which are so much better than you guys, which is like Nestor's like main role in the Iliad is to basically say that. So I wish they'd given Nestor something more to do, but that really doesn't matter. Also, in the fight between Menelaus and Paris, neither of them are wearing helmets. That annoyed me for some reason. Shouldn't have. Literally no one else should care about that, but because in the Iliad you read so many like suiting up, armour, like getting the armour on processes, like a huge amount of that poem is dedicated to people putting on armour and the decorative helmed, you know, plumed helmets, like, sorry, and you know, plumed helmets. The fact that they aren't wearing helmets in the fight annoyed me. Literally tiniest nitpick. No one else in the world should even think of caring about that. But so like I said, if you want to comment down below, if you have any thoughts, comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe, and tell me how you're feeling about this show so far. More than halfway through now. And I will see you next week. Bye guys.